So when I was a kid, I used to read comic books, and every comic book that I would buy had in the back of it an ad for sea monkeys. And for years, I would look at these ads, and with the family in it, and their smiles and pleasant demeanor, and there's a family looking at them all, just having a great time. And the ad promises they can do tricks, and they can be trained, and they're friendly, and they obey your commands, and they are simply awesome. Just awesome. You just have to add water, it said, and the bliss began. So I saved up some money and sent it off to the sea monkey farm and waited for my little friends. I thought they'd arrive in some big truck with like a crate, and they'd bring them in. And I prepared the tank, I poured the water, I waited for the magic to begin. Well, they came in this little pouch, this little foil pouch, and they're really just tiny, tiny shrimp. Not even enough for a decent meal if you got, desperate. And the bad news is you cannot return them, and soon I saw who the real monkey is with that. And I remember saying out loud, is that all there is? Is that all there is? Well, it was a lesson about life. I get asked that question a lot by people. Is that all there is? I mean, maybe it doesn't come in that exact way, shape, and form always, but that's what people want to know. Maybe in some ways, maybe even a multitude of ways. My expectation for my life, it doesn't match up with my experience. My career, or my kids, or my marriage, or my joy, or my future, or me. Well, I'm not who I believe that I would be. Somewhere along the line, I was promised sea monkeys, and all I got was these tiny little shrimp. This happens a lot. And for Christians, when it happens, we're sort of in a double bind here, because the Bible spends so much time filling us with promises after promises of a rich, full, abundant life, saying that God is generous and that Jesus loves us, and we believe that being a Christian, well, that should make a difference in how I live and in how my life looks and how I feel. Is God's word with his promises, his greatest promises of generosity and life and abundance and love, is it a little better than a sea monkey's ad? Is it just marketing? Is that all that it is? We may even find ourselves asking a question like Peter, who followed Jesus every day. And one day he asked Jesus, "Look, Jesus, we've left everything to follow you. What would we have?" Last week we asked 4 questions. Where are you going? Where is your home? Who do you love? Who is your God? Where are you going? Where is your home? Who do you love? Who is your God? And we said that how we answer these questions will determine a great deal about the richness of our life, about the quality of our life, about the vitality of our life. Ruth continued to answer those questions well. Now, if you followed the sermon last week, you know that Ruth was from Moab, and she followed her mother-in-law, Naomi, after their husbands died, back to Naomi's homeland of Bethlehem, because they had no means by which to even survive. And although Ruth was leaving behind everyone and everything that she had ever known at great personal cost, she made a covenant with her mother-in-law. She said to her, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. And your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. And where you die, there I will die, and I will be buried." And when Ruth and Naomi returned to Bethlehem, Ruth promptly went to work doing the only ethical thing a woman in her condition could do to make it. And actually calling it work is sort of a misnomer. What Ruth did is sort of a combination between toil and charity. Between toil and charity. Ruth is what is known as a gleaner. Now, what is a gleaner? In our day and age, in that day and age, the law of the land, which we know as the Old Testament, commanded that if you had a field, you were not to harvest it all the way out to the edge. If you had a field, you weren't to pick up the fruit that didn't make it through the first harvest, or the grain that fell to the ground, but you were to leave it for the poor and for the alien and for the stranger living in your land. And they were allowed to come through and pick up whatever was left, and that was called gleaning. Now, believe it or not, I have actually gleaned. And I don't plan on doing it again because it was not a lot of fun. On my uncle's farm by Atchison, one fall I needed some money, and I walked through the fields after the combine, picking up ears of corn, stray ears of corn, and throwing them in the back of a truck, and I sold them. And I made about $20 over a whole day. And it was a hard $20. Now, what Ruth gleaned was not so simple to pick up as just mere ears of corn. She was picking up little grains of barley, grain by grain. In fact, the job had to be absolutely back-breaking. And we're told that Ruth gleaned all day. She gleaned from sunrise to sunset, and she only took home about 3/4 of a bushel. 3/4 of one bushel. Now, what's that worth? At the end of last month, barley traded for $5.94 a bushel. So Ruth worked all day, to put it into our terms, and made less than $4.50. So she wasn't getting rich off of doing this, but she certainly was being provided for in a lot of ways by God. Now Ruth, by coincidence, if you believe in that kind of thing, which I don't, wandered into the field of a man named Boaz, who was a cousin to Naomi's dead husband. And the first time we see Boaz is in his field, and he sees these poor women reaping, and he bellows out a hearty, maybe even a jolly, "The Lord be with you." And the women respond, "The Lord bless you." So I don't know if you all are quite into this morning, so why don't we try this to make sure everyone's into it. "The Lord be with you." That was good. That was good. That was good. Good job. I made the 815 do it 3 times because they just weren't. They just weren't with me. Well, Boaz was an older man. He was unmarried, but not too old to notice an attractive lady. He immediately asked the servant in charge of the reapers, "Who's the new girl?" And the servant replied, "She is a young Moabite woman who came with Naomi from the country of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." And so she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. And Boaz was so taken by her faithfulness to her mother-in-law and to God that he immediately made her feel at home. He said, "Glean in my fields. Don't glean in anyone else's fields. And if you get thirsty, you just get a drink from where my hired men are going to be drinking." And Boaz also told Ruth that she'd be safe gleaning at his field. She would be under his protection because, as it so often happens, it is the weak and the poor and the foreigner and the outsider who are subject to the worst kind of abuse. And at this point in Israel's life, it was a lawless land. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and it wasn't safe for a woman like Ruth. And Boaz gave Ruth wine to drink, and he gave her bread to eat, and he gave her roasted grain to eat until she was full, and he even instructed his men to let her glean among the unharvested sheaves. And he told them to just pull out some of the bundles of sheaves and just lay them on the ground and let Ruth pick those up. If there had been a red carpet available for him to roll out for Ruth, he would have done it. He would have done it. And Ruth, she was absolutely awestruck by Boaz's kindness and grace, and she fell on her face and she bowed to the ground and she said, "Why are you being so kind to me? I'm a foreigner. You don't even know me." And Boaz replied that he had heard all that she had done for her mother-in-law and how faithful she was to God. And then Boaz shared his primary motivation. And no, he did not ask her out on a date. Yet. He said, "The Lord repay you," it's Ruth 2:12, "for what you have done, and a full reward given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So Ruth's story, this is the beginning of her climb out of a desperate situation where the experience of life was absolutely falling short of expectations, where indeed even simple survival was an issue. Let's go back to our 4 questions. If we want to change our experience, if we want to find out what God is doing through our experience, we will answer these 4 questions well. Where are you going? Where are you going? Ruth knew where she was going. As a child of God, as a disciple of Jesus Christ, we are compelled to believe that the arrow is always pointed up. That indeed we have a delightful inheritance, that indeed the lines will fall for us in pleasant places, that we have something just waiting for us, that Jesus is generous. A lot of you know Jeremiah 29:11. This isn't just marketing. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for wholeness and not for evil, plans to give you a future and a hope. When we have confidence in where we are going, we are willing to endure where we are, even if where we are falls far, far short of where we want to be. We will endure short-term disappointment for long-term delight. I don't know about you. I can't read this story of Ruth without my heart absolutely breaking for her. Within a matter of weeks, she went from a home with a new husband and all of the anticipation, all of the joy that life likely brings. Children and family and security. She went from that to back-breaking labor in a foreign country alongside the poorest of the poor, literally risking life and limb to eat, to survive. Imagine if we were suddenly plucked out of our home through circumstance and we were put in a homeless shelter in a foreign nation. That's what Ruth faced. Can you imagine the temptation to lose hope? Can you imagine the temptation to simply settle to survive? Can you imagine the fear of failure? Ruth knew where she was going, so she could endure it. The other night, the Royals had a big win, a really big win, 13-0. 13-0. In the later innings, 7th, 8th inning, the Twins threatened to score. They mounted a little rally. They had, I think, guys on first and second and one out or nobody out. The kind of situation where Royals fans usually throw their hands like, oh my goodness, the game is over. But people were not nervous at all. It was a laid-back affair. It was joyous. It was righteous even. People were dancing in the fountains, maybe with some help from barley. They'd been gleaning. Why? Because the home team had an insurmountable lead. Folks knew where the story was going to go. When Jesus rose from the tomb, he built an insurmountable lead over death and decay and sin. He permanently pointed the arrow of creation in our lives up. The death of death tells everything we need to know about where our story is going to go. It doesn't matter if our experience right now doesn't meet our expectation. How do you believe your story is going to go? How's your story going to go? The road may be long, it may be winding, it may be treacherous, it may have a whole lot of potholes, but Jesus' promise is, do not be frightened, do not be afraid, do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Where is your home? Where is your home? Ruth knew where her home was. Last week we said home is where the heart is. Home is where the heart is. And Ruth's heart, it was aligned with God. Unfortunately, our hearts usually are not. Our sinful selves are usually wired for works righteousness. We are wired to judge ourselves and judge others by what we do, gauge success by the heights we have scaled, by the worlds we have conquered, by the skins on our belt. Well, God is not impressed with what we do. Can you imagine God sitting back and saying, that Eric, I'm impressed with him. He does a lot of good stuff. I'm really impressed with that Eric. God is not impressed. God doesn't need doers. The world has plenty of doers. In fact, doers usually do more evil than they do good. What impresses God is the heart. It's the heart. Ruth's circumstances were far from impressive, but her heart was. Even though this was this was a situation that she never envisioned herself in, she took to it with enthusiasm. She didn't rest in a needless way. She was grateful to Boaz for his kindness. She thanked him profusely for the simple act of simply recognizing her, taking notice of her. Ruth didn't take anything for granted. The great temptation when we are in distress, when our experience doesn't meet with our expectations, is to grab the reins and tell Jesus, hey, Jesus, this isn't the way that I want things to go. I'm going to take over. And so we move Jesus from piloting the plane to co-piloting to sitting in first class, and eventually he's in seat 27F. That's how it all goes. It's a huge mistake, big mistake. Calvin's playing football this fall, and one of the veteran coach's great inventions is a traveling trophy, professional wrestling style, WWE style, a big gold belt given to the boy, not who makes the most tackles, not who scores the winning touchdown, but the boy who shows the most effort, the most grit, the most hustle. See, this coach, coaching 6-year-olds, is not after winning so much as he is teaching them about how to play hard and how to have fun. What's our coach after? What's our coach after? He wants us to have hearts for him. His delight, the psalmist says, is not in the strength of the horse, nor is pleasure in the legs of a man, but the Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him, in those who hope in his steadfast love. Ruth's heart aligned with God, so she could see the blessing of being allowed to glean around the edges of a barley field. Ruth's heart was aligned with God, so she could be grateful for small favors like being noticed. Do we have a heart? Do we have a heart to see what Jesus is doing? As Francis of Assisi was beginning his monastic order, he was pressured to conform to the expectations of what the church had always done. And one of the bishops literally said to Francis, and I'm sure none of you have ever heard this before in the church, we've always done it that way. I'm sure none of you have ever heard that phrase before in the church. Well, Francis refused. He refused under intense pressure from his superiors, and he saw God doing something else in the world at that particular time. Francis's heart saw God doing a new thing, a needed thing, something different than what the church had been doing for a long, long time. And Francis said to the bishop, God has called me to walk in the way of humility and showed me the way of simplicity. I don't want to hear any talk about the rule of St. Augustine or St. Bernard or of Benedict. The Lord told me he wanted to be a new fool in the world. A new fool in the world. We can't see the new thing God is doing if we have an old heart. We just can't. And by definition, if we are asking, is that all there is? We want something new. Maybe what we really need is not a new circumstance, but a new heart. Who do you love? Who do you love? Well, Ruth loved those who were hard to love. She loved those who were hard to love. Our tendency when our experience falls short of expectations, when we've been sold a packet of sea monkeys, is we're going to circle the wagons, I'm going to cover up, I'm going to grab my gifts, I'm going to stuff my blessings in a sack, and I'm going to take care of me. In fact, a whole lot of literature out there says you need to make sure you take care of you when things are going badly. Now, Naomi could not have been the easiest person to love. Now, we told you last week, Naomi changed her name from Naomi, which means blessed, to Mara, which means bitter. And then she insisted that everyone call her by that name, so she couldn't have been the most pleasant person to be around. And we also don't know exactly what Naomi was doing while Ruth was out working her fingers to the bone from sunrise to sunset. But it looks like that Naomi or Mara or whatever she was calling herself these days didn't bring a lot to the table, at least at this point in the story. And life for Ruth certainly would have been easier without bitter Naomi following her around. In fact, Ruth might have even been justified theologically for kicking Naomi to the curb because Naomi believed that God was actively working against her. And if there's one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to actively work against God. Well, Ruth didn't do any of that. She didn't do any of that. At the end of a long, hard day of reaping, working sun up to sunset, earning $4.50, Ruth brought home everything. including half her dinner, and she shared with Naomi. Ruth 2:17 and 18. She gleaned in the field until the evening, and then beat out what she gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley, and she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law also saw what she had gleaned, and she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. One of the best ways to overcoming struggling with who we are and where we are when our expectations do not meet our experience is to change the conversation. Shift the focus away from ourselves and shift it on to someone else. Doing unto others as we would do unto ourselves demonstrates just how much Jesus, our neighbor, has done for us. Finally, last, here today. Who's your God? Who's your God? There was a story in the news a couple weeks ago about a Nigerian pastor. His name is Reverend Faye Pama Musa. On May 14th, it was late in the afternoon, early evening. His wife was preparing supper. He was playing with his kids. One of his daughters noticed some armed men climbing over the fence around their house. And the men soon busted down the door. They yelled for everyone to get on the floor. They were Islamic terrorists. And the men grabbed Musa and they shouted at him and they said, "Call on your Jesus for you to help." And Musa, he struggled and he fought, calling on Jesus continually as the men wrestled him out to the car. The last words his wife heard her husband say was, "I will never deny my Savior." Who is your God? Who is your God? Boaz, he saw exactly what Ruth was doing. "The Lord repay you," he said, "under whose wings you have come to take refuge." We take refuge under all kinds of lesser, gossamer, fallible, broken things. Waiting for those sea monkeys to arrive was merely the first time that I waited by the mailbox or by my email or for a phone call, hoping that it would come at long last and it would be something that changed my life. I've waited on people breathlessly only to be disappointed. I've placed my exorbitant hope in projects and permissions and promotions and places and privileges and approvals, only to find out that over-promising in this world is not relegated to ads on the back page of comic books. When will we learn to wait on the one who will repay us when we take refuge under his wings? What if we waited on a righteous, loving God in the same way we wait upon the flawed and different things of this world? What if we sprinted to our time of prayer the same way we sprint to our email, the same way we sprint to our cell phone when it rings? What if we began by taking Jesus at his word, that he is a generous God, he is a good God, he is a loving God, a giving God who will not withhold any gift from his children from those who ask him? What if we began there, anxiously anticipating for Jesus to do, watching and waiting and hoping and praying to be given eyes to see? What if we waited on Jesus in that way? We wouldn't be disappointed, because hope does not disappoint. Hope in Jesus, that is. Because Jesus is a God who has revealed himself as the God who meets us where we are, who exalts the humble, who fills the hungry with good things, who does not send the poor in spirit away empty. Jesus' promises, they're not marketing tools. Jesus' promises mark us for a generous life. Amen.